Clayton Shoppa of St. Francis College in Brooklyn can come.
Thank you. Share your slides with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm just realizing I might be also. Am I also? I'm talking to people online as well. Is that right? Or they can hear me?
John is okay. He's
okay.
Installed there, waiting in the queue for tech.
Thank you guys for having me. I have to give a special thanks to John and Greg. I don't remember the details of how we made it from Chicago to Milwaukee under the cover of darkness, but I am grateful that they boosted my morale in what was a very a test of my commitment to this event. So I've got about 3,000 words and change to get through, so maybe on the briefer side. This presentation takes the form of a sequence of 3 expansions. First, a debate. Second, an organized debate. And third, a dialectically organized debate. So, first, the debate. My name is Clayton, and I believe in aliens. When I say this, what do I mean? It would be easier, I think, if I had been abducted, if I had had a close encounter of my own. I could share the details of that event with you, leaving you to make up your mind about my credibility. That's not what I mean, though. I think it would make for a more exciting presentation for you. I've always liked science fiction, and science fiction takes aliens seriously. But it's not just me, of course. In the history of philosophy and theology, belief in aliens is not the province of outliers. Canonical thinkers have wondered and worried about rational life on the moon or beyond our planet's sun in faraway worlds. So this is one of those debates that you could use to tell the story of philosophy, science, religion, as I was reminded when I came across Michael Crow's 2008 book, The Extraterrestrial Life Debate, Antiquity to 1915, a source book, published by University of Notre Dame Press. It would make a great college elective, I think. Epicureans found it plausible that the infinite universe would be filled with many other worlds. Nicholas of Cusa believed in aliens. Giordano Bruno couldn't shut up about his own beliefs and suffered a terrible fate at the hands of the Inquisition, though it was his heresies that were at stake and not so much his cosmology. Unwilling to hold his tongue, they relieved him of it, his voice and his life. Descartes believed it was impossible to say for sure, considering it a matter of supposition rather than knowledge, whether the stars were inhabited. And I wonder what you think, whether you believe in aliens. If you challenged me by way of reply to be clear about what I mean, I'll admit that I don't know that aliens are real. Recently, I watched a documentary called The Age of Disclosure from last year, which makes the case for the existence of alien intelligence and its cover-up. The movie consists mostly of interviews with scores of experts, and to its credit, it is crystal clear about the high stakes of this issue, how momentous it would be if there were aliens, for our civic authorities, for our culture, for our religions, and ourselves. I think the existence of aliens would amount to a third Copernican revolution. The stakes are that high. So when I believe in aliens, my belief is not a priori, as it was for Bruno, but more a posteriori, as it is put forward in this documentary. My belief is because of a lot of interviews with intelligent people of goodwill. I find their testimony compelling. I believe in their belief. You can rent the movie on Amazon Prime. What matters for our meeting is the difference between believing and knowing. I find that there are at least 3 ways belief and knowing work together. I'll call these 3 tenses. In my confessional anecdote about aliens, I put trust in the reputation and integrity of others' judgments, having made too few of my own. Lonergan gets at much of this in insight. Many specialists from many fields would do well to understand what understanding is. Understanding is largely a creative matter of finding patterns among data. Images are what we depend on when we find any such pattern, but sometimes our best guesses are not sufficient. Sometimes we want more than a bright idea. When Lonergan says the criterion of truth is the unconditioned, he means that we can verify our best guesses by asking whether about a what. The question for reflection can only come after the answer to the question for intelligence. Is it so means by it the it of what it is. So first, there is a tense of belief that comes before full human knowing, before in the sense of analytically prior to it. There is also, though, the second tense that we get in knowing itself, simultaneous with it. Because the criterion of truth is the unconditioned, knowing something means believing it, under penalty of inauthenticity. The unconditioned is to be affirmed or denied, but regardless of our verdict, the proper contents of a judgment are these affirmations and denials. One thinks of the Sermon on the Mount. Following the world-upending concussion of the Beatitudes, Jesus teaches the audience how to make and keep promises. That is, about yeses and nos. Oaths restate in legal and superfluous terms what judgment has already said better and plainer. Under ideal conditions, what we see, know, and say are profoundly interpenetrating. One cannot look around the room and deny this. According to Arya Kosman, their interpenetration is the numinous, yet predictable consequence of our human nature. As he writes, quote, "Finding the world intelligible is no more surprising than finding the world visible. The look of the world, after all, is precisely what the eye has been developed to capture. So, with intelligence and intelligibility," end quote. The third tense is belief after knowing. By the inner word of faith, we can believe the outer word of authentic tradition's doctrine without torturing ourselves, without twisting our minds into having to take absurd leaps. Full knowing enables full believing. Religion works with rather than against reality. And God doesn't give us a mind only to expect us not to put it to good use. However, it happens that conditions are not always ideal. The actual may deviate from the ideal in unpredictable ways, as happens when biases and stupidities would separate, vitiate, and mutilate the desire to know and its achievements. Lonergan imagined insight as an instruction manual about how to avoid this unhappy outcome, as a campaign against the flight from understanding. In the preface, he pushes back against an imagined critic who would complain that its many pages require expertise of many different fields, far beyond the competency of one author. Lonergan's reply is that his aim was to seek a common ground on which people of intelligence might meet. And Father Doran, writing about the inauguration of this very institute, detects in the preface to Insight 3 steps. 1, the journey into the human act of understanding. 2, collaboration by those who have made the journey. And 3, the detailed plans of what Lonergan himself refers to as an organized investigation. In Method and Theology, Lonergan assigns philosophy a specific task in service of this ambition, namely, quote, to promote the self-appropriation that cuts to the root of philosophical differences and incomprehensions. Let me invoke something of a vanilla controversy to illustrate the function of philosophy as an organized investigation rather than an ad hoc chronology, or worse, as a graveyard of entombed arguments. You'll be familiar with the views of René Descartes, in particular that he would have us withhold assent to any claim until it's been proven true by the lights of his rigorous method. Existence precedes essence here because the scene has to be set first, for us second, to appraise its credibility. There are my hands. Should I accept this? Knowing comes first, belief second. Only after it arrives can we hang our hat on its achievement. In this respect, Descartes reminds me of Benjamin Lebet. In the 1970s and 80s, Lebet's experiments seem to show that unconscious electrical signals in the brain come before our decisions to, say, move fingers from the left hand. His work inspired scores of dissertations denying free will. The brain does the real work of initiating human action, leaving the epiphenomenal mind to play second-string catch-up. Experimental test subjects flexed their fingers as they pleased at irregular intervals that it was up to them to select arbitrarily. Measured brain activity occurring before the subject opts to move a finger leads many to interpret Lebet's findings about how the brain makes up the mind to suggest decisions are superfluous, like oaths decoratively adorning reflective understanding. Again, existence precedes essence. Lebet's research subjects were in a room with no good reason to move a finger at one moment instead of another. Should I move my finger now or now? They must have repeatedly asked themselves. Some 30 years later, research by Aaron Scherger and his colleagues shows how what Lebet measured was misunderstood by Lebet. Test subjects had to generate a sufficient threshold to act at a time of their own choosing. Scherger's interpretation corroborates executive function rather than undermines it. In fact, I'd go a step further and say that his interpretation corroborates cognitional theory, or is appreciably consistent with it. Where Descartes thought belief should come after knowledge, St. John Henry Newman, seeing the knots into which Descartes tied himself, advises the reverse procedure. Instead of doubting everything, we are to trust received opinion and tradition until we find a reason not to. Lonergan shows how Newman flips the script left behind by Descartes. Universal doubt, Lonergan writes, leaves one with no basis for advance, while universal belief gives you the chance to gradually drive out errors. The relevant portion of Newman's grammar, though consigned to a footnote in method, is striking for how it anticipates the twin injunctions to develop positions and reverse counterpositions. Scherger's work in neuroscience could be a good example of what it means to reverse a counterposition, as could Newman's reversal of Descartes. Newman's view puts belief prior to knowledge. Previously, I distinguished between three tenses and the relation of belief to knowledge: belief before knowledge, belief and knowledge, and belief after knowledge. To this extent, Newman's view is closer to the first tense. Overall, though, the history of philosophy is a very poor proving ground to differentiate belief and knowledge. For these two find their best exposition in personal or performative terms, live, on the air, when set within the cat's cradle of intentionality analysis. With respect to the contest between Descartes and Newman, the debate is not settled by appeal to a third authority, but rather to the self-appropriated performance of the knower. The differentiated subject is the tertium quid that settles the issue, pronouncing Descartes' view of the belief-knowledge relation inconsistent with how knowing works. There was once a British playwright who supposedly observed that the problem with words is that you never know whose mouth they've been in. I think it's a hermeneutic problem to which Lonergan was sensitive. The problem with words threatens to pollute the common ground on which people of intelligence might meet. Disagreements occur when a person disputes another's conclusions. Good faith efforts to overcome a disagreement are, in the simplest cases, opportunities for divergent parties to sift through evidence, inventory relevant beliefs, and seek improved rational support. It can be a happy process with a happy outcome. to teach, and to be taught. Disagreements and the authentic repair of them are, of course, rare in the historical record. Instead, it happens that many disagreements are both stubborn to the point that they conscript across generations, and subtle to the point that we struggle to detect their deforming presence in our minds and wider cultures. More stubborn and more subtle than simple cases are those disagreements that occur when people fail to notice important differences in their words and the meanings they intend with them. And the inverse is possible too. The mirage of agreement appears when people use inexact language or hear one another according to unshared, often unstated expectations, such that two or more parties seem to agree when really, under the pressure of further questions and difficult reason-forcing conversations, it turns out that they do not. Part 2 of Method finds Lonergan imagining how functional specialization would bring about state-of-the-art historical research to promote intelligent, rational, and responsible practice in the present and beyond. In Method and Theology's 10th chapter, Lonergan drafts a blueprint of his solution to the problem with words, the problem of not knowing in whose mouth they have been. Importantly, he does not add more words to the issue. His solution is more sophisticated. Offering verbal solutions to verbal problems tends either to fuel the fire or kick the can. Tempers will flare when new and improved combustible fuel is added, or factions will retreat into their sides of the ring, hardened into their opposition while comfortably ensconced in subcultural consensus. What Lonergan does is avoid the regress problem of more words by distinguishing outer words from inner words and inner words into horizontal groups, stabilizing their meaning. In language-oriented philosophy, verbal disputes would flatten the world into mere words. You have your words, I have mine. And conflict is an inevitable function of propositional incompatibility. Philosophy is nothing but an illusion on this skeptical view because language philosophers can only hope to contribute more words, igniting instead of extinguishing conflict. For Lonergan, attention to the intermediate of cognition prompts an important discovery. There is more to the world than words. If there are not just different words, but different kinds of things, including horizons, heuristics, and their corresponding contents of insights and judgments, then what is called for is a way to organize all of this into a useful structure. Lonergan calls it dialectic, one of 8 specialties. The first 3 specialties of research, interpretation, and history make data available to investigators, retrieve various meanings of the data according to their proper context, and order results into successively adequate interpretations according to historians' assessments. But dialectic, the 4th specialty, has its own scope and target. It does not investigate past materials, manuscripts, and commentaries, for it is not concerned with what was once valuable, old treasures carefully consigned to a memory box. Functional specialization is a method calling for collaboration among many experts. So, just as a professor can provide one writing prompt to students and receive many different term papers in reply, the results here too will not be uniform. Dialectic, says Jeremy Wilkins, is like an X-ray. Much as your shoulder hurts because under your skin your collarbone is fractured, intellectual disagreements recur because of differences beneath the surface of words. Dialectic finds the issue behind the issue, namely not verbal inconsistency across warring parties, but horizontal inconsistency within the minds of practitioners. So the concluding 3 steps of dialectic are called objectifications. These objectifications, or instances of self-disclosure, expand the work of dialectic to organize and resolve the problem with words. Historians rank interpretations, but the subsequent specialization of dialectic is about the reasoning behind the ranking. Its practitioners will reveal, as a function of their appraisals, what they think is meant by position and counterposition, leaving readers to infer in a personal way for themselves whether what someone alleges could possibly be consistent with what knowing really is. A second objectification leaves practitioners to imagine results improved by better positions and corrected counterpositions. And a third objectification runs through the prior two objectifications again, like a distillate run through a second distillation process to make an even finer spirit. So dialectic in method plays accordion with dialectic in insight. The later work is both a more focused and more differentiated instance of the earlier. And with this in mind, we can make quick work of the debate I staged earlier between Descartes and Newman. I can't stage a complete dress rehearsal of the three objectifications here because I am only one actor, and dialectic presumes a wider ensemble, not to mention teams of historians. But is it so strange to think that a dialectician could get to know what a historian was thinking, or that the sophomore philosophy major could grasp Descartes' meaning? Get someone thinking out loud, or better yet, writing in public, and it becomes possible to work out what he or she means by basic or elemental issues of reality, knowledge, objectivity. When we take a stand and supply reasons for the stand we take, we do something self-disclosive. Inevitably, by doing so, we reveal what we think and why it is important to think such a thing. We show our limits. Often enough, this is the familiar fodder of culture wars, but for those tired of debates that lead nowhere, a gentler, more probing approach may be just the ticket. My own incomplete and clumsy experiments have found this to be credible. Descartes famously sets a very high bar for knowledge. Even the slightest bit of doubt makes an alleged fact as good as false. And he realizes that a complete, one-at-a-time inventory of his own beliefs is impossible. Cutting beliefs back to the foundations from which they grow, he knows that he, like all of us, like doubting Thomas, has put the most stock in what comes from his senses. And yet Descartes knows his senses have deceived him. He feigns the objection that this would require him to doubt the existence even of his own body. None of his opinions may serve as the foundation of science by the end of the first meditation, for all of his opinions can be doubted. But shifting from my understanding of him to my understanding of me, when I examine what I take knowledge to be, I do not find the very high threshold that Descartes presumes. Knowing draws from what has not yet been refuted, its good reasons intact so far as they go. Affirming a virtually unconditioned does not require us to know the future ahead of our affirmation. If and when future circumstances help us reform judgments, as when new data come to light, this confirms the reality of knowledge even by disconfirming an instance of it. It turns out I was wrong about something. If it turns out I was wrong about something, then knowledge must be real. For otherwise, I could not know that I was wrong. In a more thorough and more hermeneutically sensitive presentation about Descartes' meditations, I think I could show that Descartes too often thinks of knowledge in a deductive fashion. There is a fact, and wrestling with it, we must decide whether or not we believe it's true. Dialectic proves Agent Mulder and Descartes wrong. The truth is not out there. Descartes' ideal of knowledge is neither things first for us nor things first in themselves, but rather some kind of mixture in which things, whether seen or invisible, come before the mind, as John Heaps points out when writing about medieval ambiguities and the modern mentality. The mind, always second for Descartes, as well as for Lebet, has to make itself up about things already there. One upshot of the foregoing at the level of common sense is that most of what we say we know, we really just believe.
Sorry, what'd you say?
On this, Lonergan and Descartes concur, though the meaning of their terms and the relations among them is different, owing to divergences in the metaphysical organization of the intellect alleged by each. The relation of mind to world and back again. Both authors put forward a method to test and corroborate the statements put forward by others. Were we to follow Descartes, we would have to step outside the world only to reassemble it piece by piece, overcoming doubts in such a complete way that they could be replaced by apodictic judgments. In practical and critical terms, nobody ever has, nor ever could, live this way. It's not a picture that held us captive, but rather picture thinking that constrains the questions we ask, the answers we let count as meaningful, and so on. According to the functional specialty of dialectic, it is not enough to rehearse what others say is true, good, and worth doing. Taking a stand of one's own will sometimes mean taking a stand on the basics of life, among them the difference between believing and knowing. What does this mean about extraterrestrial intelligence? Kant's anthropology concludes that the anxiety according to which nobody can know what a terrestrial rational being is, Kant's anthropology concludes with the anxiety according to which nobody can know what a terrestrial rational being is, knowledge of which is, after all, the ambition of any complete anthropology, because we have nothing to compare it to. No knowledge of a non-terrestrial rational being. Kant imagines aliens who can only think out loud, concealing nothing of their inner lives. Fichte uses I and not I to win self-consciousness, and Kant is similarly saying, on behalf of our species and its alterity, that we won't understand ourselves without first encountering a not we. It's hard to make progress when we remain as individuals. Easier to make progress by, quote, a progressive organization of citizens of the earth into and toward the species as a system that is cosmopolitically united. That's Kant, at the end of the anthropology. It all sounds familiar to readers of Lonergan on cumulative and progressive results, refusing the flight from understanding and tenaciously and patiently building a cosmopolis. Refusing to believe in aliens makes a priori knowledge out of something that is really a posteriori. It attempts to know ahead of actually knowing, forestalling the desire to know all of proportionate being, even or especially the far away. Alleging to know that aliens are not real is a cosmological counterposition. As for me, I'll wait and see what developments are possible on the far side of today. And ahead of full knowing, let's try to tidy the place up before company comes. I'm happy to take questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Clayton. I'll let you spin tails for us. I really hesitate to do this because I understand your point. I think, or insofar as I understand your point about Descartes, it's a good one. But I wonder if you could help me then, because I take Descartes to be even more complicated. By which I mean, it's interesting when Descartes goes after the senses, what he's going after is not just that his senses deceive him, he's going at the foundations of Aristotelian science.
Right.
And so what he's doing is not just doubting the senses, he's doubting science. And what's interesting is the next move for an Aristotelian would be then to go after the understanding or the intellect. It's not what he does. In fact, he immediately He knows he's flipping this. He's a smart guy. He goes after dreams. In other words, he immediately makes it about consciousness. If you go back and read what he's doing in senses, he's making it already about consciousness. In other words, he's sort of usurping the Aristotelian position. He's taking it from them completely, and then making the intellect, he's making the intellectual light, basically the foundation. But that doesn't work, and that doesn't work, so that's how he builds up the ego. And the reason why I think that's important is because the next move we make sort of how we'd have to get outside in order to sort of guarantee the world. That's not true for Descartes, right? The next move is God. It's the innate ideas, because he's not founding anything on a sort of eminently generated knowledge. It's just not what he's doing. He's doing it, it's a transcendental critique. Ultimately, that's Kant's goal. And so it makes the whole movement up to Kant through Fichte more terrifying, right? Because you get Hegel, where you get this immanentist, necessitarian, conceptualist critique as Lonergan lays out. And the real question is, how does one overcome Hegel? Because Hegel can account for facts.
I mean, this is a really useful debate. We have a couple of days together to work
Yeah,
it out.
you have right now the answer.
Yeah. I think there's like, when it comes to these primary sources in the history of philosophy, there's going to be more and less generous interpretations of them. So mine is like, he's a foil in a strategic foil. And you're right, like I know the letter to Marceau where he says, my real target is to repudiate the principles of Aristotle, so it's clear that he's not always forthcoming about the motivating intellectual problems that he's attempting to solve. And that's a much more generous interpretation of Descartes, a kind of anti-realist version of Descartes that you're offering than I gave. But then I would wonder, why are you so ungenerous to Hegel? Like at the end there, so like, is that the right interpretation of another primary source? So we have to rely. Part of what I'm trying to say in the paper, anyway, is that we have to rely on historians to really cut through a kind of extraordinary body of secondary literature and sort of set primary sources in their proper context in a way that's really, really difficult, not transcendental work. It's like in the thick of it and in the dirt of history. So I don't have a particular skill set there, but I do think there's something to be said for what would you say in response to my line about the impossibly high bar that Descartes sets for knowledge? Like that's you know what I mean? One little inkling, one little bit undermines the whole.
It seems to me with Descartes is not introducing any doubt on any position, but rather the foundations can be doing.
Right.
And that's
None of it can serve as foundation. Yeah.
and that's a different claim. Because that's why God is the guarantor is so important. Is because humans will have doubts. Right? Or humans will need to make further judgments. But they can't be the foundation. Does that make sense? I mean,
No, I agree that that's like a very, very sophisticated.
well, the reason why, the last point, the reason why I'm pushing it is because the way you encapsulate that meaning, it's not so much meaning, it's not. What if we impute counterpositions where they're not? Not that Descartes is a counterposition, I think he is, but what if that's not where it's at? Aren't we involved in a sort of damaging dialectic?
I mean, it could happen that in a culture in decline, how could you ever know you were in one? Because you're declining with the culture that you're inhabiting. So you're sort of you're descending at the same speed as the things around you are descending. So you're not able to. But this is also a point that I was trying to make too, that like if we're wrong, then knowledge has to be real. Because the fact that I've made mistakes proves that I have better judgment. Because I can affirm the fact that I've made mistakes shows me something about the value of the transcendental precepts or their kind of implicit operation, even camouflaged operation in my thinking.
I wonder on the same lines if there's a kind of prudential consideration in dialectic too, right? There's two avenues, right? There's reversing counterpositions and advancing positions. And one way to meet Andrew's anxiety is to privilege advancing positions. I mean, it is sometimes helpful and needed to clarify and reverse counterpositions. But you could run around and do that all day long and really not have actually made any progress.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if, one way to think about it is it too flat-footed to call it a hermeneutic of charity? That to approach the history of philosophy, not so much on the hunt for bad examples, but for
Right.
good ones.
I know, man. But imagine how contrary to ordinary practice that is. Like,
Well, that's certainly true, yeah.
I mean, it is like philosophy undergraduate work is often like a kind of debate club, right? Where you're like, gotcha, finding fallacies, armed with a fallacy detecting apparatus. You sort of mine popular media for examples of like, it's a kind of argumentative gamesmanship. Rather than an opportunity for wisdom and development. So, I mean, I love the idea of like turning that around into something that's a much less negative and much more ambitious and difficult work of like offering young people images of how mind can work so that they can use their own in better ways. And like, we have a lot of history. It happens, like one of the advantages to our place in history, there's so many disadvantages, but one of the advantages, we have a historical record of some length where like we've seen people make all manner of mistakes, and so it makes our own all the more inexcusable because we could have learned our lessons better and quicker and gotten up to speed in historical terms. So I mean, I think about like the international headlines we're reading about war is a really good example. Maybe it'll work this time, So I think that's really, it is a much more constructive use of the history of philosophy than maybe we all got something quite different in our classes, but like if we think about the wider academy or something. Thanks.
Sure. So thank you very much for this. First of all, I want to say at the beginning of your presentation, you said we could offer a course. I also wanted to advertise that St. Mike's this year, and the course called Aliens in the Heavens, Christian Encounters with Cosmic Pluralism. It's nice that it is too.
Registration is still open.
Yeah,
yeah, but one of my colleagues is teaching it. So anyway, so I just thought I'd plug that.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on what you were just saying just now, because early in your presentation, so I come to this study mostly through the study of rhetoric. I mean, like literally, like English composition kind of stuff. And do you know Peter Elbow?
No.
You heard of him? Yeah. So I came to him through. There's a book called Women's Ways of Knowing, and they draw on him a lot. And I'm gonna do the inexcusable thing instead of talk a little bit about this. But the point of it is to say, is this some version of what you're thinking? Because I've never connected it to Lonergan before. Because he argues that in teaching writing, that he says the way that we typically teach people think is through what he calls the doubting game. And he says, no, I prefer to teach writing and thinking through the believing game.
Right.
Which is that my job is to show you that everyone we read is right.
Right.
And to trust that at some point that's going to break down for you.
Right.
That you're not going to be able to affirm everybody that we're reading.
Right.
I've chosen my sources. But to come at it from the believing game.
Right.
My job is to help you believe this author, whoever it is.
Right.
And what's interesting about this, and this is where I just made this, as you were presenting, made this connection to Lonergan that I never thought of before. His argument for this is not only does he think that's morally better, but he actually thinks it helps them do something that he's very interested in, which is to make their own arguments.
Yeah.
Says all you do is doubt, you never have to. You're never forced to make your own argument. If you're trying to believe, then at some point it leads naturally, he thinks, into the argument, which is like, this is what I believe. And it just occurred to me that there's something like that at work in what you're dealing with Lonergan that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
Which is that there's something about Lonergan wanting to help us be confident in making affirmations about what's real even knowing that those may be
Exactly,
utilized,
exactly.
right? Like, so I just wanted to put that out there and see if that's true.
Yeah, that's a really, thank you for that. It sounds like a really compelling. Part of what I was thinking of when I was writing this is this old, I don't think it's still on, but there was a radio show forever called Kiss I Believe, I think.
Yeah.
It was like, or maybe you know more about it than I do, but my memory of it is that it's just sort of ordinary people getting in front of a microphone and saying what they think is important. Saying what matters, NPR thing. They would just say like, I don't know, what comes to mind is like, my grandfather would always say, family is the most important thing. So if you handed him a microphone, you want to say, we want to share that with them. And so you get this much more affirmative, constructive view that, at least is a complement to the negative thing. And the believing game, our claims about what's false are themselves true. So we're, like, affirmation of the knower thing makes Lonergan a particularly affirmative thinker in a way that this kind of, oh, I caught you in a performative contradiction is always only half the story, because then you have to put yourself out there, you have to put your ideas forward. And when I teach logic classes, we talk about this sometimes where I'll say like, oh, if you think this guitar player is like not a good guitar player, but if you want to say that, then I also need you to take guitar lessons and like figure out how to play the guitar and do it better. I need you to show me what the alternative is instead of just nitpicking through primary sources or something like that. So that's the personal turn in that I find. I'm sure I'm not alone in that, but it's like a much more exciting way to read the history of philosophy.
Okay, just a couple minutes left, I wanted to give Tom a chance to do so.
Well, I'm hesitant to
Okay.
open this, but we're fellow travelers in one sense, but going in different directions. Your opening debate was, I believe, in aliens. Mine going the other direction is, I believe there's rational human life far back in the evolutionary process of humanity. How far back?
Yeah.
So, is there terrestrial life?
Right.
Yes. Is it intelligent life? When?
Yeah.
And granted that we probably are not going to be able to find out an exact threshold. Anyway,
Right.
that's a vein of interest, wrote a book in that area.
Yes.
So I'm interested in, the alien question, because in a sense, it's a variation.
They might be on Earth. Your aliens are on
Yeah,
terrestrial.
they are.
Yeah, that's great.
But it raises the question, what do we mean?
Right.
Because we're all anatomically modern humans with the brain shape of a certain sort, with the areas differentiated as they have been biologically. Neanderthals were a little different. Okay, can you be human and not be like us?
Right.
And you're asking, can you be intelligent but not?
Right. I mean, the theological question is, can you be a person?
Yeah.
And probably the answer is yes. I wouldn't want to presume to say no without having shaken hands first. I am aware that there's like there is a hypothesis in like the Earth is very, very old. Like what happened a long time ago is very difficult to say. So there's in the New York Times a few weeks ago there was an article about handprints that were like 67,000 years old, which was 40,000 years. I'm aware I'm on camera now saying things I don't fully understand. But much older than we had previously thought, and so that leaves open this question about rational life.
Yeah, when the last common ancestor, anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals, between 800 and 600,000 years ago.
Wow. In The Age of Disclosure, this documentary, several of the interview subjects put forward the idea that it's not that aliens are going to arrive, it's that they've been here for a very long time and hide in the oceans. So,
All right, thank you so much.